Ethan Parker, a 52-year-old homeowner in Florida, never thought he would face losing his home. He has lived in this house for over 15 years, always paying his mortgage, property taxes, and insurance on time. But one day, he receives a shocking notice in the mail. The letter states that his home could be foreclosed, not by the bank, but by the Homeowners Association. The reason? A past due HOA fee of just $1,500. Like many homeowners, Ethan had no idea that HOAs hold so much power. He had been slightly late on a few payments due to unexpected medical bills. Instead of a simple reminder, the HOA immediately tacked on late fees, legal charges, and penalties. Before he even realized it, the small debt ballooned into thousands of dollars. Then came the foreclosure notice. This isn't just an isolated case. Across the United States, thousands of homeowners lose their properties to HOA foreclosures every year. Some fall behind on payments due to financial struggles, while others are caught off guard by hidden fees. Regardless of the reason, the outcome is often the same. They lose their homes, sometimes over debts as little as a few $100s. Most people assume that as long as they pay their mortgage, their home is safe. But what they don't realize is that HOAs can place a lien on a property and force a foreclosure sale, even if the homeowner is fully up to date on their bank payments. The worst part? The homeowner doesn't even have to be notified until it's too late. How is this legal? How can an organization with no government oversight have the power to take away someone's home? And most importantly, is there any way to fight back? Let's take a closer look at how HOA foreclosures work, the real-life horror stories of people who lost everything, and what you can do to protect yourself before it's too late. Ethan never thought a small, overdue HOA fee could lead to something so drastic. At first, he ignored the initial late notice, assuming he could pay it off the next month. But what he didn't realize was that the HOA had already started adding penalties and legal fees. When he finally went to pay the original $1,500, he was shocked to see that the balance had ballooned to nearly $5,000. Confused, he called the HOA office, only to be met with vague answers and cold indifference. They told him that legal proceedings had already begun, and that if he didn't pay the full amount immediately, his home could be at risk. Still, Ethan didn't take the warning too seriously. After all, he had never missed a mortgage payment, and his house was fully paid off. What could they possibly do? The thought of losing his home over HOA fees seemed absurd. Then, the real nightmare began. A few weeks later, Ethan received a certified letter from the county. The document informed him that his home was scheduled to be auctioned off by the HOA due to unpaid fees. Panic set in. How was this even possible? He had never agreed to this, and there had been no court hearing where he could defend himself. Ethan scrambled to find a lawyer, but the news was grim. In Florida, like in many other states, HOAs have the power to place a lien on a homeowner's property for unpaid fees. Once that lien is in place, they can initiate a foreclosure process, sometimes without even notifying the homeowner until it's too late. His lawyer explained that HOA foreclosures operate differently from bank foreclosures. When a bank forecloses on a home, there's usually a lengthy legal process, and homeowners have multiple opportunities to negotiate or contest the foreclosure. But with an HOA, the rules are different. In some states, an HOA can foreclose on a home within months, even for debts as small as a few $100s. Ethan had only a few days left before the auction. He rushed to get the money together, asking family members for help and withdrawing from his retirement savings. But even after paying the full amount, the HOA refused to stop the sale. They claimed that additional legal fees had been added, pushing the balance even higher. The day of the auction arrived, and despite Ethan's desperate attempts to halt it, his home was sold to an investor for a fraction of its actual value. The HOA had won. Ethan was left homeless, forced to move in with his sister, while he fought a legal battle that he had little chance of winning. The worst part? The HOA didn't even have to return the extra money from the sale. In many cases, the HOA and the law firms they work with pocket the profit, leaving the original homeowner with nothing. This wasn't just about Ethan. Across the country, similar stories were unfolding every single day. Families losing their homes, elderly homeowners being pushed out onto the streets, all because of a system that few people truly understand until it's too late. How did things get this bad? And what can be done to stop it? Ethan refused to accept what had happened. How could he lose his home over something so small? Desperate for answers, he started researching other homeowners who had faced similar situations. What he discovered left him stunned. Across the country, there were thousands of stories just like his. People losing their homes over unpaid HOA fees as low as $500. In some cases, the homeowners didn't even know they owed money until it was too late. The HOA would send letters, but if a homeowner was traveling, dealing with personal issues, or simply overlooked the notice, the fees would pile up. Before they knew it, their house was on the auction block. Ethan reached out to a local investigative journalist who had covered similar HOA abuse cases. The reporter explained that many HOAs work closely with law firms that specialize in aggressive collections. These firms make millions by charging homeowners outrageous legal fees, fees that often exceed the original debt. What made things worse was that many states have almost no oversight on HOA foreclosures. Banks are heavily regulated when they try to repossess a home, but HOAs, they often operate with little to no government supervision. Then, Ethan found something even more disturbing. In many cases, the HOA board members themselves or their friends were the ones buying up the foreclosed homes at a fraction of the price. These properties would then be flipped or rented out for massive profits. It was a system designed to exploit homeowners who made even the smallest mistake. Realizing the scale of the problem, Ethan decided he couldn't stay silent. He reached out to others in his community, organizing a group of homeowners who had also been targeted by the HOA. They began gathering evidence, finding patterns of corruption, and exposing how the HOA was profiting from foreclosures. Then, one day, Ethan received an anonymous tip. Someone from inside the HOA sent him an email with shocking details, documents proving that the HOA had intentionally misapplied his payments to make it seem like he was behind on his fees. In reality, he had paid more than enough to cover his dues, but the HOA had diverted part of his payments to a miscellaneous fee category. This technicality allowed them to claim he was delinquent and proceed with foreclosure. This wasn't just incompetence, it was fraud. Armed with this new evidence, Ethan and his group contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA abuse cases. The lawyer confirmed that if they could prove the HOA had knowingly misapplied payments, they might have a case to overturn the foreclosure. For the first time in months, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Would he be able to expose the HOA's corruption? And more importantly, would he ever get his home back? Ethan sat in his sister's small guest room, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His home, the place where he had raised his kids, where he had spent years building memories, was gone. Taken from him not by a bank, not because he couldn't afford it, but by an HOA that saw him as nothing more than an opportunity for profit. For weeks he had felt nothing but despair. He replayed every moment, every mistake. Could he have acted sooner? Could he have done something differently? The weight of losing his home, of being tricked and manipulated, crushed him. But then, something changed. The discovery of fraudulent accounting by the HOA lit a fire inside him. This wasn't just his fault. This was a system built to exploit people like him. And if it had happened to him, how many others had suffered the same fate? How many people had been forced out of their homes, too scared or too hopeless to fight back? He opened his laptop and began searching for others who had lost their homes to HOA foreclosures. What he found was horrifying. A retired veteran in Texas lost his home over an unpaid $800 fee, despite owning the house outright. An elderly woman in Arizona, suffering from dementia, was evicted because she forgot to pay her HOA dues for 3 months. A single mother in Nevada had her home auctioned off for a fraction of its value because she unknowingly missed a few payments while she was in the hospital. This was not a series of coincidences. This was an epidemic. Fueled by anger and a renewed sense of purpose, Ethan started making phone calls. He reached out to lawyers, journalists, and even state representatives. Most brushed him off. HOAs had legal protections, they said. Fighting them was expensive, exhausting, and rarely successful. But then, he caught the attention of a local investigative reporter. The journalist had been following HOA abuse cases for years and was eager to expose yet another scandal. He agreed to look into Ethan's case. As the journalist dug deeper, the corruption became even clearer. Emails leaked from a former HOA board member revealed a shocking truth. Certain homeowners were being intentionally targeted. The HOA, in collaboration with its law firm, had been selecting properties in prime locations, slapping them with late fees, and letting the debts spiral out of control. Then, they foreclosed and sold the homes to investors, some of whom had direct ties to the board members themselves. Ethan had started this journey thinking he was alone. Now he realized he was part of something much bigger. Word spread fast. Social media exploded with people sharing similar horror stories. The news station aired a special investigation segment on HOA corruption. A state senator, after seeing the public outrage, called for an inquiry into HOA foreclosure laws. Then, something Ethan never expected happened. A lawyer representing the HOA reached out with a settlement offer. They were willing to give him back his home, but only if he signed a non-disclosure agreement and agreed to drop the case. For the first time in months, Ethan had power. He could take his home back and walk away. But what about the others? What about the people still trapped in the system, still losing their homes? If he took the deal, the HOA would keep doing this. For the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan knew exactly what he had to do. Would he risk everything to bring them down? Or would he take back his home and move on? The decision would change everything. Ethan stared at the settlement offer in his hands. His home, his sanctuary, was within reach again. All he had to do was sign the agreement, stay silent, and let the HOA continue its corrupt practices without interference. His hands trembled. The thought of returning home was tempting. He could finally sleep in his own bed, reclaim his life, and move past this nightmare. But deep down, he knew accepting this deal meant turning his back on everyone else who had been victimized. The HOA would keep exploiting homeowners, and no one would hold them accountable. His phone buzzed. It was an email from a woman named Linda Myers, a 72-year-old widow from Texas. She had seen his story on the news and wanted to share hers. She had lived in her home for over 30 years, but after missing an HOA payment while recovering from surgery, the fees skyrocketed. The HOA foreclosed on her home and sold it to an investor for less than half of what it was worth. She was left homeless, living out of her car. Ethan clenched his fists. This wasn't just about him anymore. Instead of signing the settlement, he contacted his lawyer. They were going to fight. With the help of the investigative journalist, Ethan and a group of other affected homeowners filed a class action lawsuit against the HOA and its law firm. The evidence of fraud and manipulation was overwhelming. Former board members and even an ex-HOA attorney came forward, confirming that homeowners had been deliberately targeted for foreclosure. The lawsuit gained national attention. Major news networks picked up the story, lawmakers started pushing for reforms, and social media was flooded with outrage. Then, another breakthrough happened. A group of state legislators, fueled by the growing public pressure, announced that they were drafting a bill to limit HOA foreclosure powers. If passed, it would require HOAs to go through a full court process before foreclosing on a home, giving homeowners a fair chance to dispute the claims. Ethan couldn't believe it. What had started as his personal tragedy was now turning into a movement. But the HOA wasn't going down without a fight. Their lawyers hit back hard, trying to discredit him, digging into his past, and accusing him of being a troublemaker. They attempted to have the case dismissed, claiming that their foreclosure process was perfectly legal. Ethan refused to back down. He had already lost everything once. He had nothing more to fear. Finally, after months of legal battles, the judge ruled in favor of the homeowners. The HOA was found guilty of unlawful foreclosure practices, and the court ordered financial compensation for the victims. But the biggest victory? The lawsuit sparked a national conversation about HOA abuse, leading several states to introduce laws protecting homeowners from unfair foreclosures. Ethan didn't just get his home back, he had changed the system. And he had done it not just for himself, but for every homeowner who had ever been wronged. Ethan stood in front of his house, the same home he had nearly lost. But now, everything felt different. He wasn't just a homeowner anymore. He was a fighter, an advocate, a survivor. Months ago, he had felt powerless. He had watched his home be taken from him, had been forced to sleep in a spare bedroom at his sister's house, had nearly given in to despair. But now, he had won. Not just for himself, but for the thousands of people who had been silently suffering under the control of corrupt HOAs. The lawsuit had done more than just return his home. It had exposed an entire system of abuse. Media outlets across the country were now covering similar cases, and homeowners everywhere were starting to fight back. Laws were being rewritten, regulations were being put in place, and HOAs were finally being held accountable. But Ethan knew his battle wasn't over. Winning a lawsuit was one thing. Changing the system for good was another. Instead of returning to life as usual, Ethan took his experience and turned it into a mission. He started speaking out at town hall meetings, advising homeowners on their rights, and even working with lawmakers to push for new regulations. He started a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping people fight back against HOA abuses, providing free legal resources and support for those facing wrongful foreclosures. The more he learned, the more he realized just how deep the problem ran. HOAs weren't just a few bad actors. They were an entire industry with little oversight, fueled by greed and corruption. and they weren't going to stop unless people like him forced them to. At first it was difficult. He faced backlash from HOA lobbyists and lawyers who wanted to silence him. Some even tried to intimidate him, sending legal threats, claiming he was spreading misinformation. But Ethan refused to be bullied. One day, he received an email from a man named Daniel Cooper, a single father from Arizona. Daniel had seen Ethan's story and reached out for help. His home was about to be auctioned off for a missed $400 HOA fee. He had nowhere else to turn. Ethan jumped into action, connecting Daniel with a legal team and rallying the community. With the pressure mounting, the HOA backed down, canceling the foreclosure. Daniel got to keep his home. It was in that moment that Ethan realized something. His own suffering hadn't been for nothing. If he had to go through it all again just to save one more person from losing their home, he would. He wasn't the same man who had received that first foreclosure notice months ago. He had found his purpose, and as long as HOAs continued to abuse their power, he would keep fighting, because no one should ever have to go through what he did. Ethan sat on his front porch, the same spot where he had once opened that devastating foreclosure notice. But now, instead of feeling fear and uncertainty, he felt something else. Peace. His journey had been filled with pain, betrayal, and countless obstacles. He had nearly lost everything, but through it all, he had discovered something far more valuable than just reclaiming his home. He had found his voice. Looking back, he realized that the old version of himself, the man who had once ignored the HOA's late notices, thinking they were just minor inconveniences, was gone. In his place stood someone who had fought an entire system, who had refused to be silenced, and who had proven that even an ordinary homeowner could take on a corrupt industry and win. But this wasn't just about him anymore. After his victory, dozens of states began reviewing their HOA foreclosure laws. Lawmakers who had once dismissed HOA abuses as rare occurrences were now acknowledging that the system was broken. Proposed bills aimed at restricting HOA foreclosure powers were gaining momentum. And all across the country, homeowners who had once felt powerless were finally standing up and demanding change. The impact of Ethan's fight could be seen everywhere. People who had once been too afraid to challenge their HOAs were now speaking out. Homeowners were learning their rights, organizing, and pushing back against unfair regulations. But the greatest victory came from the countless emails and letters he received. Messages from people who had been on the verge of losing everything. People who, because of his story, had been able to fight back and keep their homes. One letter stood out. It was from Linda Myers, the elderly widow from Texas who had lost her home. She wrote, "Ethan, I don't know if you remember me, but your story gave me the courage to fight. I found a lawyer, I went to the media, and I stood up for myself. And guess what? I got my home back. I owe that to you. Thank you for reminding me that we don't have to accept injustice. We can fight, and we can win." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes. This was why he had done it. He had started this battle believing it was just about his own survival. But now he understood that his struggle had been part of something much bigger. It had been about proving that no matter how powerful an HOA or any organization might seem, they are not above the law. It had been about showing people that even when the system feels rigged against them, they still have power. And most of all, it had been about reminding homeowners everywhere that their homes, their lives, are worth fighting for. As he watched the sun set over his front yard, Ethan smiled. He had won his home back, but more importantly, he had won back something even greater: his purpose. And as long as there were people like Linda still fighting, his battle was far from over. Ethan's story teaches a powerful lesson. Never assume that your home is safe just because you pay your mortgage. Homeowners associations, originally created to maintain communities, have become a system that can destroy lives with hidden fees, aggressive foreclosures, and unchecked power. The biggest mistake Ethan made wasn't missing a payment. It was ignoring the warning signs. Like many homeowners, he believed the HOA was just a minor inconvenience, a group that handled landscaping and community rules. He never imagined they could legally take his home. But they could. And they did. This is why it's critical to know your rights. Read your HOA's bylaws and never ignore late fees, no matter how small. A few $100s can quickly turn into thousands, and before you know it, you could be fighting for your home. The lesson is clear. Stay informed, stay proactive, and never assume that it won't happen to you. If you live in an HOA community, take action now, before it's too late. Check your HOA's foreclosure policy. Some states allow HOAs to seize homes for even the smallest debts. Set up automatic payments. Avoid accidental late fees that can snowball into legal action. Attend HOA meetings. Know who's making the decisions about your home and hold them accountable. Push for transparency. Demand clear accounting of where your HOA fees are going. Know your legal rights. If you're being unfairly targeted, seek legal help immediately. HOA foreclosures can happen faster than you think. Don't wait until you receive a foreclosure notice. By then, it may already be too late. Your home is more than just property. It's your future. Protect it.